Great. All right, so we're going to get straight into it. I'm actually going to pass the first question to you, Philip. For the longest times, you hear people talk about, we're building the Y Combinator of Africa. And that talk has seemed to have quietened down a bit, like no one's trying to do that anymore. Do you have maybe some insight as to why that isn't working or why it could work?
Sure. No, we very much believe that Startup Bootcamp, first of all, is a global network of accelerator programs. So we took the Y Combinator model of the original accelerator concept, and we said we wanted to take it and put it into all the places in the world where there were natural gravity wells of talent, of distribution. So Y Combinator's approach has always been to take the best innovators in the world and try to bring them all to Silicon Valley, where they have a concentration. We look to distribute it the other way. So yes, it is easy to say by some, we're trying to build the Y Combinator of Africa, but it really isn't that, right? We're trying to take the benefit of Y Combinator's accelerator approach, which are many, but adapt it and apply it in an African context. I think the performance of our fund over the last 7 years, we've had 70 African startups, and we are at about a 4.6x multiple on our funds, which by global standards would put us in like top decile return. So I think we're doing well in a returns perspective, but certainly in a very different manner.
Yeah. So Philip, I mean, you've worked in this space for a very long time. How many years is it now?
30 years professionally, but
in Africa?
15 years in Africa.
15 years in Africa. So what is different in Africa? Like if someone says building the Y Combinator in Africa, like why doesn't that model work exactly here? What have you seen that's different in Africa?
Sure. I mean, there's a shorter answer and a longer answer, but we all know that the fundamental infrastructure challenges in Africa are. So if I wanted to take an Amazon, I'll date myself, but I was in the dot-com industry when Jeff Bezos launched version 1.0 of
online bookstore
of Amazon bookstore. So you're many years way back when. So oftentimes when I have slides, I'll show what the MVP of Amazon looks like. But he didn't have to solve for payments.
Yeah.
Credit cards worked in the US. He didn't have to solve for mail and delivery and distribution. Like when they put a package in the postal system, it got to its recipient. If someone had to return, it came back. He didn't have to solve for all those things. That was 1996. In Africa today, many of those things are still hard. Payments are still hard in many parts of the continent. Logistics, we know, is still very hard. Reliability and supply chains, all of that is hard. So he could build an awesome product on top of a whole bunch of other things that worked well.
Yes.
In Africa, the founders have to solve for many different things. Now, that's an incredible opportunity. This is not a woe, pity, it's so hard in Africa, but it's just recognizing that you can't just build the same things. And therefore, the founders and the products and the solutions that we look to accelerate are the ones that have a unique understanding of the context here and are going out and solving those in the African context. So we oftentimes, we started out many years saying African solutions for African challenges. But one of the most amazing parts about it is that when African solutions solve African challenges, usually we're solving them in a much more profound way. And we believe ultimately where we're getting to now is that tipping point we see African solutions for global challenges. Because the solutions developed here and many times outperform the solutions in Europe and in first world markets.
Very interesting. Kevin, you're originally from South Korea, you work in Senegal. Maybe give us a bit of an overview of that. And also, to Philip's point, how are you helping founders navigate some of those challenges of maybe like infrastructure and things not being in place?
Sure. As you know, South Korea is one of the emerging, also very innovative country in the world. From non-existence decades ago, but now Korea is a tech powerhouse in the world, doing a lot of achievement in the recent days. I was once working for the government back in about 12 years ago. During the time that the Korean government started building up its startup ecosystem, fortunately joined that bandwagon and then formulating strategies and executing all the different programs during the time as a head of the government agency for supporting startups. So I had a bit of experience this startup ecosystem, how to develop from the scratch. So I actually, when I came to Senegal, commissioned by the Korean government to help the Senegal's startup ecosystem, I thought that I can exactly replicate the same experience I had back in Korea and apply to the Senegal startup ecosystem. But in fact, the infrastructure, especially technical and social infrastructure, much different from the back at home. So I have to figure out a different level of the program that actually tailor for the Senegalese society and economic situation. So, and also the technical infrastructure is so much difference. In Korea, is everything digitally connected, but it's not only the digital itself, but economically, the digital divide also kind of such income differences in rich people and poor people is stark differences. I mean, it's so difficult to where to target for our startup, because in the end of the day, you must secure the customer, the true customer, but the customer, the population itself is really limited, because you have to capture the customer who can pay, not just donated by the startup. So that is a kind of issue I have realized, and then start to formulating different types of program for Senegal environment. Yeah.
Interesting. Melvin, I love the fact that you're an ex-founder. So you sat on one side, and now you're a partner in a VC firm. So you have deep first-hand experience of the pain and frustration of building a business, right? Can you maybe share, what are some of the things that you think are the most important things that VC firms need to do in order to support African founders well?
And I think, thank you very much, first of all. I think I like the context made around understanding the African context, because an African founder is different to a US founder. And unfortunately, in our journey, I think the first African investor we had in our cap table was in our Series D. And we raised from Microsoft, Salesforce, SoftBank, many players, tier one players globally. And I think as an African investor, or even just how to support African founders, I think it's both as policy government level, where it's important to support African founders. I think it's not necessarily about creating more programs, it's about removing barriers. I think often trying to scale across Africa is difficult as an entrepreneur, yet for you to attract meaningful venture capital, you have to be scaling across a region versus one country. I think from the investment lens now, the most valuable thing I realize now as an investor is time, because the trading of time between speaking to a portfolio company, trying to find a new company to invest in, or speaking to LPs. And I think the same thing is true for founders. And the question is, how do investors support founders to help them create more time to focus on their businesses and not necessarily be a drag on them, whether that's the reporting, the questions they ask, or to try add value? And something I don't think we talk enough about, because obviously when your investor says do something, you'll say yes because it's the right thing, but it might create unnecessary focus for you as a business. I think on the other side, which I can't put to investors, but I'm sure all the entrepreneurs in the room have had that investor who wants to invest and says, hey, I know this guy at that company, I'll introduce you. I know this lady who's chair of that entity, and they'll give you business. And I think the greatest support one can do for entrepreneurs is open up doors to actual products and actual customers. Sure. I don't think VCs do enough to open up their Rolodexes for their companies or for entrepreneurs, because the reality is, advice is nice, money is great, but the most powerful thing is a purchase order. I think often as VCs, we discount the power of saying, hey, X person, I don't know you, I played paddle against you this morning, please can we support this founder and give them some work?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it's the whole distribution thing, right? So helping them get into market. And on the one side, it's money, it's income, but on the other side, it's also a customer that gives feedback, it's experience, it's learning, it's a case study, it's a reference point. Exactly. And I think that's grossly undervalued, I think, mostly. And so, Melvin, just in terms of, lost my train of thought. I'm going to go to Joy. Joy, you are head of the Gen AI division at Amazon. Maybe share a bit about what you do and how that impacts the work and innovation in the startup space.
So I'd love to take credit for that, but no, I'm not the head of, but certainly do lead.
CEO of Amazon.
I
What-
know, at this point I'm taking everything I can get. But no, I do work across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, but as part of the Generative AI Innovation Center and lead in the innovation and engagement space. So what we're doing is we're looking at proofs of concept actually scaling across different industries. So typically we found that it was 29% success rate for proof of concepts into enterprises, whereas we were at a 68% success rate within the Generative AI Innovation Center. So my world was to take that from just what we were doing in-house into actual tangible physical spaces where customers could come, innovate, share what they wanted to build, and then be partnered with from scientists, strategists, myself and my team. So that's what I do to clarify there. And I think, is there a question on the back of who I am and what I do?
Yeah, maybe just Gen AI, like how's that impacting early stage startup development?
Love and love. All right, so typically you would have the primary innovation market where you're looking at building from scratch. So we've talked a lot about investors pitching to startups, startups pitching to investors, and that whole model was from the pre-2020 pitching to build from scratch. Now where we are is you can actually build, as we all know, with tools. Subscriptions, 20K here, 20K there, etc., give you access to foundation models, technology, tooling that actually builds your infrastructure and your base. This is a game changer that Gen AI has brought to level the playing field for the African market. That gap of starting up, that need for capital, where we've seen that kind of depleting on the continent, you have these tools that very much are accessible via mobile. Again, one of the most mobile active participation mechanisms is mobile here in Africa. So to have that combination of mobile ready, I think we're at 50% of the 26-year-olds and below are African. So I think you know the stat, like it's a very young continent. So you've got youth continent, you've got mobile ready, you've got active connection to Gen AI tools through mobile. So the costs have gone down. And what I would also say is that automation approach as well. Because it's automated so many systems and tools, what you have is you have a very low need for resource and specialism. You have access to so much more than you had before Gen AI. So what we've seen is that it's been a leveler, and where we are now, we work in the realm of MVPs and proofs of concept. But I actually think that Gen AI has worked so much to be able to bridge that ability to have proofs of concept that the place that you'll actually come to now is a lot of building and needing to actually test and validate that what you've built is needed and is required. And I think that that's an area where AWS is really looking at providing support, providing access to our accelerator mechanism, providing access to our marketplace, providing the support to startups in that way, because Gen AI is leveling out that need for external factors. Not that it's not needed, but just not in the same way it was maybe about 5 years ago.
Awesome. Given you work with a lot of early stage founders, do you see high amounts of adoption of Gen AI? Is it helping them speed up, or is it still too early to say?
Well, there's a certain trend in Senegal also. I see that now our partners who work with us actually providing the Gen AI skill set to the early stage founders, transform the and the early learning and quicker implementation of the ideas. So for our next project, actually, the Korean government have another project that actually providing AI capability for the Senegalese young students and early stage startups to actually equip with this Gen AI technology to be transformed as a startup founders. That's another project we are planning at this moment. Back in Korea also, there are a lot of hypes about this Gen AI to improve the productivity, especially white collar, office productivities. When I was start work back in 1990s, in Korea, Korea is typically the manufacturing base. We have all kinds of manufacturing capabilities, and the KPC is a Korea Productivity Center. It's an 80 years old organization helping SMEs to improve their productivity. So, but one challenge remaining during the time, if I remember, it was a white collars, office workers' productivity. It never, improved. So once I started using Gen AI, ChatGPT in the beginning, about 2 years ago, it was eye-opening. I saw myself, I can improve 1,000% in productivity in my work because I'm doing all the research, all the documentation. So, same apply to the startup founders. They can do all kinds of market research, pitching decks, and whatever they do, they can get a lot of help. So definitely there are a lot of improvement in the way.
And I think one thing that's important is actually helping them find the right tools, because there's so much out there. I mean, if you just look at what is available, that's a full-time job, right? So in order to help startups, you can be knowledgeable on this and actually just direct them to the right tools.
But one thing still, I often see that what is lacking in many of our early stage startups, that they don't do any customer discovery. What they're doing, they just create what they want to do.
Yes.
Whatever the product and service they want to do. I mean, they just assume that it could be the right product and for their customer. But in the end of the day, they don't have a customer, so they fail. I saw so many of them. You cannot do with the ChatGPT or any other tool. You have to do it by yourself. You're talking to the people, talking to your potential customer. That's what is lacking for the African startups.
Yeah. And I want to make a big distinction here between, the kind of using Gen AI to make the cool app, which is the no code, but the fact that it's so easy to do also means there's no moat. So one of the really important parts is that for any of the founders out there, but all the ones we're talking to, is exactly this: you have to build a defensible business. And using the AI at the foundational levels is where right now there's a massive gap in Africa. We don't have the GPUs here. We don't have the ability for founders to go in and train their models. A perfect example of this: we have 2 different startups that are both solving the problem of AI for X-rays. So assessing, Black African lungs, but they're basically using models that were trained on North American and European lungs. TB, tuberculosis, is not really a problem. And therefore, the AI model's failing at trying to diagnose tuberculosis. It can pick up pneumonia, it can pick up other things, but bronchitis, it can pick up even cancer, but can't pick up tuberculosis because it hasn't been trained. So now, very recently, Cassava and a couple of others have announced that they're bringing GPUs and setting up data centers. We're actually setting up and raising right now for an AI accelerator. We've partnered with Cassava, and one of the opportunities will be for the founders to sit on top of those GPUs and actually have access to trained foundational models. So we think that's going to be a big difference. But for those that don't have that opportunity or don't have it yet, just make sure that you don't get caught up in the hype of, I've made this really cool thing that I could have never made before, but someone else could come along and 5 minutes later and make it as well, right? So keep looking for that core business model or a key differentiator in terms of you've trained something at a foundational level that others haven't been able to do.
So Philip, I think it's such an important point because it actually touches to your first point around infrastructure being available when Amazon launched. And I mean, this is another example of it, GPUs being infrastructure that is available. Whose responsibility is it to put the infrastructure in place? Is this private sector, government sector, combination? Who's going to do this?
It's happening by combination. So Cassava is private sector, but but governments are attracting them. So Western Cape government and South Africa, I think the G20, I think, was probably a catalyzing effect. But now Google, Meta, now it's coming. It's just it kind of comes last, right? Africa is there's a variety of reasons for that, right? But so it's hard to really say, who should step up. But the reality, but we as actors in our own respect need to be pushing for it as much as possible. So we can't bring the GPUs as Startup Bootcamp, but we can run an accelerator that partners with the people that have made those big infrastructure investments, and we can try to help startups to build really interesting stuff on top of that utilization. Other funds will come along, and Brega will invest in the follow-on funds, which we don't do. AWS will provide a lot of the bolt-on tools and the cloud computing. So like we're all working together here, and I think that's something that happens here much better than it does in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, because you don't need that.
I think that speaks to the heart of the topic around coordination. I think we have a very vibrant ecosystem. I think there can be better coordination, I think, across the borders, but even I think within the ecosystem more broadly, to the point Philip raised around different parts of it. But I think to your question around who should lay the infrastructure, I think it's what infrastructure. I think the reality is the government has a role to play in setting down almost the rails upon which private sector can thrive, but in the same vein, things to make commercial sense that one's willing to invest to make something happen. And so it's almost that chicken and the egg, and I think all of us have a role to play to make it more accessible from a foundation perspective. Whether, some of the work we're doing now in the government is around, let's say, digitizing IDs and thinking about KYC, because the cost of KYC, looking at the India example, actually went down quite significantly when the government stepped up. But it wasn't necessarily that the government then created everything else thereafter. And so it's just about saying, like, how do you play where you can, but more importantly, the key is coordination.
And it makes it, go for it, go.
Yeah, I just sometimes when the African government announcing their, fostering that, AI applications, all the activities, sometimes I felt that it's like a kind of, they don't see the reality of the, what does it mean by the, using AI or applying AI, because it's not only just a software stack itself, but you have to think about all the data center and the power supply, also water. Especially the power is really crucial for the African countries. Even, when I look at that, so many different African countries, they really lack of power source. If you don't have a nuclear power plant, you cannot really sustain this kind of, a data center. Also, water is a crucial necessity for all the African countries. Some African countries are suffering from lack of this water.
Yes.
So I think this is the things that the government have to realize how difficult it is to grab this technology. It cannot do with the cloud computing resource. It must be reside in one particular country or one particular company. So this is a really daunting task for the developing nations.
It makes me think about anybody who's ever tried building a marketplace startup, how complicated it is to pull it off, right?
Yes.
Supply side and demand side. So you've got these rails, that do not have enough demand yet, but also, on the supply, getting that balance right is just really complicated.
Another thing is think about the AI chip itself. It's a semiconductor. How many countries can make this kind of chip in the world? There are only a couple of countries, It's in USA, Taiwan, South Korea, 3 countries in the world. No European country actually
But
produces any
that's why we're
semiconductor.
glad that you're here, Kevin. So you can hook us up.
Yes. So that kind of a deep tech startup we have to looking for in Korea. So government funding a lot of these new AI areas and also material science these areas, but it's so difficult to have that kind of deep tech technology.
No, I was just going to say, and I think that's why this partnership around accelerators, maybe more so venture studios now, we're seeing the rise of that, just to kind of put that structure around. And then ultimately what we have begun to see is that a lot of this innovation, especially in the startup realm, especially at that lowest stage, is at the edge. It is being, a lot of things, especially where customers are, is happening at that device level. And so really kind of looking at that being a different model than what we're seeing in the West or seeing in other parts of Europe. And so really leveraging around that, and problems with power supply, problems with water, etc., are somewhat mitigated when you're only dealing with transacting or working with a device, because you have a longer term of charge up, power, etc. So it's a short-term hedge against some of these longer-term government-related, policy-related, infrastructural changes. Not a solution, but certainly something that will allow traction in the early stage. And I think a point that I did want to raise previously was this minimal viable traction piece. You spoke a bit about asking questions to your actual customer base. You spoke about the moat. And this kind of piece is where we're looking as well at, you spoke about marketplace and the challenge of supply and demand. And some of the kind of confluence that we have, or at least this kind of crucible, is the support we try to provide through the AWS marketplace for approved startups that come on there, because that moat can be difficult, that go-to-market strategy can be difficult, that ability to test whether this product is viable and has customers can be difficult. And so providing a bit of that umbrella is something that we do aim to provide to give that kickstart to startups that, do qualify. I have to do that pitch because you all might be in the room and we all might be able to help. But it was just a few points I did want to land there. It all is not necessarily lost, but I know you were going to come in with a point.
Well, I was just going to shout out to AWS. I mean, I don't know how many of you know that where cloud computing was invented. Anybody know what country?
Around the corner.
Right here, Cape Town. So the EC3, it just so happened that the team or the guy that they assigned to solve this problem, and it really wasn't designed as a product. They were just trying to solve an internal product. But he happened to be South African, so he was sitting down here, and lo and behold, the greatest concentration of cloud computing kind of for Amazon, AWS, is all sitting in Cape Town.
Yeah.
So, and this was a great thing when we ran the first accelerator program partnering with AWS, is the AWS engineers would come across and sit, side by side with the founders and do office hours and just help them walk them through that process. So this is not an AWS, endorsement, but you guys have done amazing things. But to kind of to the point about at the next tier, at the AI level, it's not just getting the GPUs here. We also need the people that are training at those levels also to be nearby our founders. So that's also something we're going to have to solve and attract. And I think, to me, I try not to think about, oh, well, this should happen. We need to make a plea. No, we need to make it exciting for them. I mean, we need to make it an enticing thing so that the first founders that we put on those GPUs start to build stuff that others look at and say, we don't want to miss out. The Googles and the Metas and the Llamas and everybody else are going to all come here because they're going to see African founders are thinking about solutions to stuff that we're not thinking about in the West, right? We're not thinking about in the North. We're not thinking about in Asia. They're thinking about different types of challenges, but these are massive challenges that have massive solutions, and there's massive profit. So let's get down there and support them in building those solutions.
And I mean, an example of that is out in Stellenbosch, the data science lab that discovered the Omicron variant of the coronavirus.
That's right.
They get visitors from the top data scientists in the world. Like they come here to meet them to see what they're doing, and they're bringing in that talent and bringing the proximity of that talent closer
That's right.
to the people working on the site. So that's an example of some success that leads to more people getting attracted there and coming into the space.
Added to the topic that we are discussing, one thing, last 2 days, including today, is a lot of investors and founders are talking about investment, funding, money. But the one thing I'm missing here, I see the collaboration between the large corporation and small startups. Say it's open innovation. You see, this concept is actually, we're not only providing the money or investment into the startup, but we have to provide the opportunity, a procurement opportunity for the startup. They can sell their product. I mean, the first, they must have an anchor customer to, sell, generate the revenue. That is a really more valuable than, 100K they receive from the investors. So for the African startup, probably this kind of collaboration between the large corporation and the startup is really have to be discussed and then focused.
I want to close with you, Melvin, on the topic of funding. Yeah. It's easy to say, let's just get more money to early stage founders. We all know, that there's a big need for that. But what do you think is the answer to getting more startups to come through the system and seeing more startups coming to the stage where some of the VC funds are sitting waiting to put money in, but they just don't have enough deal flow?
I think it goes two ways. I think one, we need to start celebrating the wins we have achieved. I think we've created benchmarks for our ecosystem where we only celebrate unicorns versus the journey towards being a unicorn, with different rounds that we raise. And I think often when, let's say, for example, an African company raises a significant round, it's often a international investor versus a local investor celebrating that, even though local investors are the ones who are also on the cap table. And so I think we need to celebrate our wins better so people know that we actually are doing well. Because I think often we're too quiet about celebrating that. But I think in the same vein, I think when you think about as investors, how do we create long-term capital? Because we expect our entrepreneurs to have long-term ambitions, yet our capital is short-term, and thinking through what that really means around how do you match the capital with the ambition.
And it often takes a bit longer in Africa to get that kind of traction. Most likely due to your point that you made in the beginning, Philip, just the infrastructure not being there, so having to develop every part of that just takes so much longer.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Well,
Last comment?
yeah, so we've got 30 seconds left, but yeah, I'll just maybe double click on that point. I mean, the thing, obviously that gets faster, we get better at it, we know what we're doing better. To Melvin's point about collaboration, we don't each have to solve the entire value chain ourselves. And I think there's a much greater level of kind of cross-firm and inter-firm collaboration.
Startups working with startups.
Startups working with startups, funds working with funds, corporates and corporate venture capital, doing blended capital structures. There's a lot more creativity here out of necessity. But I also highlight for the founders that in the US and in Western markets, that innovation is somewhat of a luxury, right? But in Africa, it's really an existential reality. Like the jobs are not there for the most part. Like if you're not an innovator, if you're not a founder, if you're not a creator, good luck. So here they're driven by a different passion, a different reality for their families, and I think that's something we can be very proud of here.
Right. Awesome. Thanks for all the insights from all of you, and really appreciate all the work you do in the African startup and innovation ecosystem. Come on, let's give a hand to these guys and lady. Over to you.
Well done.